like to thank you again for coming to today's crop clinic discussion. We're going to be having Paul Johnson speak. He'll start in just a minute or so. As I mentioned, there will be CEU credits available at the end of today's talk. You will need a QR code reader to be able to scan that. That will show up at the end of the presentation. I will put that up for a few minutes. We'll also be having a poll that will pop up, and we ask that you please fill that out. And without, excuse me, further ado, I'd like to invite Paul Johnson. Paul, if you're there, go ahead and start sharing your screen. Paul Johnson is our Extension Weed Science Coordinator. Paul is the person we all go to when we have weed problems in our research plots, and he's a great resource for weed management. So today he'll be updating us on his herbicides and soybeans, and it looks like also be giving us a dicamba update. So Paul, when you're ready, go ahead and take it over. And Paul, you're muted at the moment.
Yep. Good morning, everybody. Just would like to start out, being I'm the first speaker of the week, just to give a little plug for my coworkers. You know, tomorrow Adam's going to be back, and he will be talking about insect pests, and Emmanuel is going to be talking about fungicides. Tomorrow, that's Wednesday. Thursday, we've got Anthony Bly talking on soil fertility in beans, and John Kleinjohn talking about planting date. And then we're going to finish up on Friday with Jack Davis. It'll be a little bit shorter session on Friday, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions for Jack relating to the present marketing of soybeans and so forth. So we want to get on to today. I pretty much got the full hour, and so we're going to leave some time at the end for you to ask some questions. Oh, it seems like there's a few of those, but we're going to share some things here. And as Adam said, I'm going to be talking mainly about soybeans, but also I do have some of our research, and we'll make some comments about the dicamba labeling because that is important, and everybody, it's one of those topics that I think everybody has an opinion on. When I look at soybean weed control, we start out, it needs to be powerful, like your picture on the right, you know, but yet the picture on the left, it needs to be very gentle, because soybeans are easily affected. And so consequently, with both those things in place, it makes it very tough to deal with controlling weeds in soybeans, and really have been our challenge for the past since herbicides come about. Soybeans have always been tough, and we had the Roundup Ready era where we thought it was really easy, but now as we're going past that again, soybeans become a lot tougher to deal with. So the one thing that's different from corn or wheat or all of the other areas, with soybeans, we have several types of soybeans that are available, and by that I mean by their traits. If we start out, is conventional soybeans that have no traits, no GMOs involved, and there's actually a market there for those. And so some people are wanting to look back at those types of soybeans. We've got Roundup Ready out there. You know, there then came along Liberty Link. And now one bean we don't talk a lot about up here, but there's the SDSU, STS, or Bolt. SDSU, man, I'm thinking of our jacks here, but no, we got the STS, the Bolt, Or also there are some beans that have the SDS trait in them that also have had Roundup Ready added to them. And those beans are the ones that can take real high rates of SU chemistries. Then we got Roundup Ready to Extend, or the Dicamba beans. And then came along the Enlist, or the ET3 beans, or the 24D beans. And then we got the GT27, or they were referred a lot to as the balance beans, but where we can use the light pre-emergence on them now. And finally, this fall, the Roundup Ready to ExtendFlex, or basically saying they have Roundup, Dicamba, and glufosinate tolerant. So let's look at a few of the positives relating to these particular beans. Positive points of conventional: higher sale price for the beans. We're seeing in this area, especially if you're close to the St. Lawrence area or Miller, about $1 premium a bushel if you can raise those conventional beans. And you know, that can play in if we got some low weed pressure areas. And with those conventional beans, in a lot of cases, farmers are able to save their own seed, so there's reduced cost in most cases. Now, I'm not saying here that farmers can save that seed and sell it to other people, but they can generally save it and use it themselves again. Have less drift problems to other crops with the conventionals. We don't have to worry about the genetics there as much. Moving on to the positive points of Roundup Ready. A lot of available good genetics out there in that. The conventional, I should have mentioned, there is good genetics, but you need to be very selective, and you need to be looking at a lot of yield trials to determine what's the best genetics out there. But with Roundup Ready, boy, there's just a lot of good genetics from a lot of different companies, and a lot available that way. Very good weed control if no glyphosate resistant weeds are present on your farm. You know, Roundup still does a great job on a lot of weeds, but in a lot of cases we have kochia resistant weeds, or Waterhemp, or mare's tail out there. Of the traded seed, probably the most reasonable in cost. Everybody's got it, everybody's around, so the cost on them are a little bit less. A lot of variations in type of plant and natural resistant traits in these beans too, because being we've had them so long, we've been able to build that into those genetics very well. Positive points of Liberty Link. Different chemistry from glyphosate. And, you know, when we're looking at rotating chemistries, the Liberty Link really does come into play. And so consequently, that is different chemistry, and so we can help deal with resistant problems. Good weed control, but the key always with Liberty Link is let's keep those weeds small, ideally 4 inches or less. You know, I go back to, I was at the fair, and an old boy come up to me and he said, boy, I really don't like those Liberty Links. I planted everything to them this past year. And I said, oh, well, what was the problem? He goes, well, on my Waterhemp, I only killed the top 12 inches. And I said to him, well, you only killed the top 12 inches. Well, how big was the Waterhemp? And he goes, well, about 24 inches. And I said, but Liberty is for small weeds, 1 to 4 inches. And he comes back with, well, I can't even see them yet then from the road. How am I supposed to know when to spray? And so, you know, we need to be scouting and make sure our weed control with all the systems out there. We really like to see spraying those weeds before 4 inches tall, because in a lot of cases, and there's research out there, if we let the weeds get too big, we are affecting our yield, even if we can take them out. You can use the Liberty Link more than once per season. Showing no resistance at the present time. And it works best in hot, humid conditions. The hotter, the more humid, boy, that Liberty Link will really fry those weeds quickly for you. Usually does not have drift problems. Unless you have some severe wind conditions and you're moving particles. And also with Liberty Link, we like to see those smaller droplets. So if you have real small droplets and high winds, yeah, you can have some particle drift, but it's usually not a problem in most of our spray situations. Positive points of the STS or the bolt beans. This is a natural trait that was bred into the beans. So if you just have STS or bolt beans and do not have the Roundup Ready as part of them, they can be sold as non-GMO soybeans for that higher price that we were talking about with the conventional. Again, because this is not a genetically modified trait. It was a trait done through conventional breeding, I believe, out of Kansas. You can have good weed control if SDSU resistance is not a problem. The IMI and the SUs, the resistance problems there with Waterhemp and kochia, the SUs just are not going to work if you've got those resistance in your fields. But otherwise, you can use those higher rates of SUs and help out with weed control. The thing with this, we see mainly trait available in longer maturities and not a lot of 0, 1s, 2s. You got to get in the mid 2s before you see a lot of those starting to show up. Okay, positive points of Roundup to extend beans. Good weed control in cool conditions. You know, the Dicamba does do well when we have those cooler summer days and can provide excellent weed control in those situations. Even in warmer weather, weed control can be good. Good weed control where glyphosate and SU resistance is not a problem, or where it is a problem, I meant to say. You know, the dicamba on both these resistance has did a very good job of controlling those weeds. In fact, I go as far as saying it's the best control for heavy kochia problems. Liberty works good also on kochia, but it needs to be very small and you need really good coverage because again, Liberty is more of a contact where the dicamba product translocates in that kochia and is taken out easier. good to avoid possible drift from others. There's a lot of people out there that are planting um, uh, beans that are tolerant to dicamba, just so they don't have to worry about drift from neighbors that may not be properly spraying. Enlist beans or 2,4-D beans, very good water hemp control. We've seen excellent on that. We have a lot of research, and really the 2,4-D does do an excellent job. Has very little resistance problems, given that it's one of our oldest chemistries out there. We just don't see a lot of resistance to the weeds we're dealing with in soybeans, and as far as we know, none in South Dakota. Has very few drift problems. As long as you're using the labeled products, the Enlist products, we have really seen a few drift problems. You know, up to that, we did research up to 15 mile an hour and have seen movement of less than 2 feet. And if it's more wind than that, you probably shouldn't be spraying anything anyway. And so we're very happy with that. You know, the Enlist soybeans are tolerant to 2,4-D. We've been talking about that, but they're also tolerant, so you can put glyphosate or Roundup over the top, and they also are tolerant to glufosinate or the Liberty trait. So really, with the Enlist beans, you have 3 traits that are bred into them: tolerance to the 2,4-D, the glyphosate, and the glufosinate. And as we can see, as time has went on, you know, our beans were developing more traits into them. The GT27 beans, or better known as it was being developed as the balance beans. That balance product in soybeans is referred to, and the trade name is a light. And a light in SDSU testing has showed to have the longest pre-residual of any labeled products in South Dakota. If we look at a product like Prefix in other states where they can go at higher rates, where they don't have to worry about carryover, that product can have a little bit longer residual. The GT27 beans are Roundup Ready. And they also have glufosinate tolerance or Liberty tolerance. So again, we've got 3 traits with these beans that they do have, and allow us more chemistries and more rotation possibilities there. Very excellent broadleaf control with these. And the pre overall has very good grass control too. The one area we do see some weakness with a light would be for yellow foxtail. And that chemistry has always been a little weak on yellow foxtail. But compared to our other pre-treatments out there, and unless you've got some higher rates of dual or warrant, all the other pre's are going to be poorer on grass. Okay, now the last beans, the positive points of Roundup Ready to extend soybeans. The Extend beans are tolerant to, or the ExtendFlex are tolerant to Roundup. They're tolerant to dicamba, and they're also tolerant to glufosinate. And really been waiting for these beans to get out for about 3 years, because now we do have a bean that allows us When conditions are right, those cool, damp temperatures, we can spray the dicamba and do it safely. But if it's hot and humid, we can use the Liberty or the glufosinate tolerant beans and do a good job there, because in that hot humid is when those Liberty beans work the best. You know, and as I point out here, it's great in both temperature conditions. So that's what we have for beans out there. So let's take a look at some of the research we have, and we can talk about a few of the things related to that. Again, I would say best control of small weeds. If we're looking at these products, again, overall, we want to spray the weeds small. We need to keep thinking that as we move forward. Okay, conventional treatments. Wanted to show you some from Northeast Farm. Really got a good variation in weed pressure up there, and so kind of wanted to show those. The weeds we evaluated here, beans were planted May 14th, yellow foxtail, common lamb's quarter, red root pigweed. One of our program treatments starts out with Sonic, followed by Flex Star and Select Max. We can see here 89% on the yellow foxtail, 96 common lamb's quarter, and 97 red root pigweed, 52 bushel yield. Authority MTZ, followed by Avalanche and Section 3, just a generic form of Select. We can see very good weed control here again, and 50 bushel yield. One that probably didn't do quite as good for us this year, Spartan Charge, followed by Cobra and Select Max, 93, 93, 96. Kind of looked good. We were a little weak early, and consequently 43 bushel yield. Now, this was in our regular demos, so I'm going to throw in here the program average of the demo treatments. And again, these ones would have a generic trait in them. We can see a little bit higher on the weed control and a 56 bushel yield. So consequently, if we look at the LSD, with good selection here of treatments, the 52 and the 50 are really no difference from the 56, but we can see the 43 would be significantly lower. And so consequently, we'd be concerned about our yield there. But it also points out if we've got conventional beans and we're doing it, these would be kind of our top treatments. You need to be concerned to keep that weed pressure low, so you can get those maximum yield with the conventionals if you're going with that program. Okay, let's just do, you know, I always get, well, I don't want to plant these beans because they don't have good genetics or whatever. Well, we kind of did a screen this year, and obviously we can't replicate it, but I just want to show you this. We had some 0.9 ExtendFlex soybeans, 54 bushel. 1.2 ExtendFlex, 54 bushel. 1.3 ExtendFlex, 49 bushel. GT27, a 1.7, 51 bushel. Another 1.7, 55 bushels. And this was done at our Volga station, a 2.0 at 50 bushel. We can see pretty much the same. We also put some Enlists in those strips, 0.9 at 51, a 1.3 at 58, and a 1.6 at 53. So our total thing here, what we're kind of trying to say is no big difference in any one of the traits. we still need to select the good genetics within and what works best in our area. You know, and we always look in the Brookings area around a 1.5 is what we kind of strive for. But we can see here some of the 0.9s still yielded up pretty good, and the 2.0s are getting a little bit longer, also didn't yield bad. So it really comes down to picking varieties, not picking types of systems. Any of the system is good. It's the genetics within you have to pick. Another question that's come up a lot is, okay, Roundup versus Liberty, and now that we've got the genetics where we can spray both of them together, does it help any? And we're doing a summary across here, and this actually comes out of in our GT27 beans, and so this is across all locations. Roundup, yellow foxtail, green foxtail, giant foxtail, common lamb's quarter, red root pigweed, velvet leaf, common water hemp, and resistant to glyphosate common water hemp. So we can see the weed control here. Roundup did a good job across the board, but where we had the resistant water hemp, only about 50% control. And that's what we're seeing in our resistant area is it's about a half and half situation right now. Liberty, see all the treatments here. Yellow foxtail, a little weaker on velvet leaf, common water hemp, where it isn't resistant, maybe just a hair poor. The resistant water hemp was fairly tough for that to control too. Now we put full rate of both together, and we can see overall, okay, yellow foxtail, 1% down from Roundup alone. Green foxtail, 1% from Roundup alone. The same with giant foxtail, the same with red root pigweed. A little bit lower on red root pigweed. Don't know why that one happened there. We can see on velvet leaf running about the same. On common water hemp, it's better. And the resistant water hemp, it's also better. And I think that's the real importance, where we can see that the two together could help. So how'd they yield? And on here we can see our LSD, all of them were fairly good, a little bit more variable on the water hemp. Yield wise, here we've got Northeast Farm, Southeast Farm, Volga, and the average of the three. Roundup 57, 36, 49, and 47. Liberty 53, 31, 52, and 45. And we can see these Southeast numbers are lower. Got real dry there at the end of the season and really took off that top end yield. Now, if we put the Roundup and the Liberty together, 55, 40, 57, and we can see overall the average for the two together had the higher yield. If we look at the checks, we can see we had very heavy weed pressure. And if we put the LSD there, we can see that overall, and I wasn't one that was pushing this, but it does appear the Roundup and the Liberty together do give us a little bit extra kick, and especially when it comes to water hemp. And so consequently, if you've got grass and water hemp together, and your grass is getting some size to it, I think the mixture would help you out significantly. Okay, just looking at some grass control. This would have come out of the Northeast Farm. Again, planted on May 18th. We got yellow foxtail, common lamb's quarter, red root pigweed, and our yield. Our program averages, here we can see yellow foxtail, common lamb's quarter, red root pigweed, 55 bushel yield. Here we got a treatment where we got Authority Supreme followed by Anthem Max and ExtendFlex. Nothing real good for yellow foxtail, only 58% control. Good common lamb's quarter red root pigweed control, but only 31 bushel. Here we've got Authority first, followed by Anthem Max and ExtendFlex. Again, 60% control, only 18 bushel. If we look at our check, was 12 bushel. If we look at our LSD, 4 bushel difference on yield. We can see where we didn't have the grass control here, we really took the yield out. And so as we're moving away from using a lot of Roundup, we're going to see grass continue to come back and be a problem. And especially with yellow foxtail, there's very few treatments out there where the pre works real good on them. We need something for good grass control post-emergence to clean up those situations. So just keep that in mind. Just wanted to point that out a little bit here today. And finally, the Soybean Council helps us out a lot with our demo treatments, but also we've been doing some work with resistant water hemp versus non-resistant water hemps. So we're going to want to look at our 2 trials, one at Beersford, where we've had water hemp for the last 40, 50 years. We still do not have resistance there. Our program average, green foxtail, 93, velvet leaf, common water hemp, yields 36. Where we had the Authority MTZ followed by the Durango. So basically just a glyphosate post-emergence here, 99, 99, 99, 35 bushel yield. So really no difference there at all. If we look at the check, was 11 bushel and our LSD was 3. So no matter how you went, we're good. Now, let's look at Volga where we got the resistant water hemp. We've got our program average, 98 giant foxtail, 95% on resistant common water hemp. Our yield is 66 bushels. Where we had the Authority MTZ with the Durango, or we didn't have anything post-emergence for resistant common water hemp, or that's over 50%. Here we can see 99, 54, and we lost just about 20 bushel yield by not having good control of our resistant water hemp. If we look at the check, 9 bushel, and again, our LSD shows 4 bushel difference was all we needed for significant. So yes, the resistant water hemp, if that gets built up and we're not doing anything post-emergence for it, even though the Authority MTZ controlled it good as a pre, those pre's wear out, especially Volga this year had about average moisture and was very wet to start with. So these chemicals do break down and consequently we lost yield. Okay, we're kind of going to switch over now and we're going to go into trying to report on the dicamba and not show opinions. We've seen a lot in our area of news where everybody has an opinion, and I'm going to try and stay clear of that, but just show you the research. Why do we do simulated drift on dicamba? To better understand the subject, to determine if a certain level of dicamba does not hurt yield to non-dicamba beans. To get a better understanding of the science, and like I said, you know, we like to stay with the science and see where it sends us, to determine if it can be done without drift. That's also a sideline, but for my crew, it's to show that we can do this. Can we do this right and avoid drift situations? And to show the science and not the bias. Really very important point there. Okay, let's just take a look. We're going to look at these soybeans. These were planted again the first part of May, and this is on July 16th, or about 10 days after the last treatment was applied. Here's our check. We can see we're getting close to, we should have canopy closure within the next week or two. Here we sprayed Cobra Early on these beans. Again, looking about like the check. Here we sprayed Cobra right at the 1st of July. And we can see just a little bit of, how do I want to say it, differing leaf formation. Really hasn't fully come out of that spray application there. That would have been 16 days earlier. And here now, this is Cobra a week after, or about 10 days before this picture. And we can see we still do have some of that leaf burn or speckling on the leaves there in that situation. Now, here we've got ExtendFlex sprayed over the top of these beans at 0.0022 fluid ounces per acre. So obviously a very low rate. Now, if we look down in here, we can see just a little bit of a few puckered leaves that are showing up. And again, this would have been applied 16 days earlier. Here now was where Cobra would have been sprayed the last week in June, and followed by on the end of June with the ExtendFlex over the top, those same 0.0022 ounces in the center 2 rows. So in all cases, these were separate applications, but just showing it. We can see there's a little bit of puckering, maybe a little bit of stunning there, but overall, just about as good as the last ones. Here now, would have been done on the same day, but the Cobra would have been sprayed 16 days earlier, and the dicamba on the center 2 rows would have been done that same day 16 days ago. And we can see there is a little bit of stunting there. Now here we would have sprayed the dicamba 16 days earlier, and then 10 days earlier the Cobra would have came over the top of the whole 4-row plot. I'm just taking time to explain this to start with, and then we're going to go through these a little bit faster. Now, this was the ExtendFlex at the 0.0022 ounces. Here's ExtendFlex alone. Now we have went up to 0.22 ounces, where before it was 0.022. So we can see we did several fold increase. We can see the puckering definitely showing up on these leaves in those center 2 rows. We can see it right on the edge because the boom does cover 2 full rows. We can see it on the edges of those plants. Here now is the ExtendFlex and the Cobra, where they would have been sprayed on the same day. Here would have been where the Cobra came, or no, was early before. Here's where the Cobra, let me just go back. Here's where the Cobra was sprayed early, and the Dicamba would have been on July 1. Here we can see where they were sprayed both at the same time. Here we can see where the Cobra come a week later. Now those beans are looking pretty sickly there. Now we doubled the rate again, 0.44 ounces now of actual product sprayed over the top of these non-dicamba tolerant beans. We can see how the two center rows are really showing it. Little bit over in here, maybe there was just a little breeze, don't know, but you can see that isn't perfect on the spraying there. Here we've got the 0.44 ounces with the Cobra that was sprayed early. Here's with where they would have both been sprayed on the same day, but at separate times. So kind of, again, we're simulating drift, so we don't want them applied together. It would be if the field was sprayed that day, and if it was drifted upon that same day. And here's where the Cobra come a week later. Now, we got one final set left at where we went over the top with on the center two rows again with 2.2 ounces, or basically this would be 1/10 of a rate of the ExtendFlex, of a full rate. Here with the Cobra early, here with the Cobra late, or no, regular time, and here with the Cobra late. So that's what they looked like 2 weeks after. So let's look at some of the data to try and show you here what we've seen. Again, on this one, we've got ratings from 7/16, which was the time the pictures were taken. We've got an 8/24 and a 9/21 on ratings, and then our final yield. So our check, no injury, 73 bushel yield. Dicamba early, no injury showed up whenever, and a 70 bushel yield. The post Cobra, and again, no dicamba here, just post Cobra, but on 7/16 we did still see a little bit of an injury, not much. We did still see some on 8/4. By 9/21 none showed up. 70 bushel yield. And here's the late Cobra, you know, on those ratings. We did see some injury just from the Cobra, but didn't affect the yield here. Now, if we look at where we did the simulated drift of dicamba over the top, 0.0022 ounces, we can see did show a little bit of an injury early, but did not affect the yield. Where we had it with the Cobra early, about the same here, about the same yield. Cobra, where it was the same day, we can see had some injury early, but yield still held up pretty good. And the Cobra late, we had more injury to start with there, came down, but still pretty good yield. And on these, we were looking at an LSD of 4 bushels. So consequently, all of these yields would be considered the same. Now, when we go up a little bit higher, let's go to the next slide, and we will see here where we've got it at 0.22 ounces now of dicamba. We had injury throughout. We had 56 bushel yield. If we added the Cobra Early, about the same, had injury throughout. The Cobra at the same day, we see a significant loss here of yield over the first two. And the Cobra Late also had a significant loss over the first two. Now we go up higher to double that rate to 0.44 ounces, 49 bushel, 44 bushel, 28 bushel, and 27 bushel. We can really see where a drift happened, where a burner type chemical was applied at the time of or later than the drift. We really additionally affected yield beyond where the dicamba was alone. And I think that shows out in all of these rates. We have one more rate to look at, the 2.2 ounces. We can see our yield was really cut back there. You know, if we're looking at a 73 bushel check, we can see a big difference there. And obviously these beans were injured throughout, showed significant injury, and ended up that way. You can see the 4 bushel yield. I'm just going to go quickly through some now pictures where you can see the beans on this 9/21 date, or getting close to harvest. These would have been harvested the first part of October. Here's our check. We can see that's what 70 bushel beans looked like in Volga this year. Cobra Early, Cobra same day, Cobra Late, ExtendFlex Early, ExtendFlex with Cobra, ExtendFlex with Cobra Early, with Cobra same day, and with Cobra Late. Now, look at how the canopy is more open as we get up to the 0.22 ounces. We can see why those yields are where they're at. Again, these were all 4 replicated. We're just showing you the first rep here, but we can see those beans obviously are very injured, and we can see the real late ones here. I was surprised at the yield we got on these real late ones, that there was any beans that did come out, but they did, and we can see they were a little bit delayed, is why we had to wait a couple more weeks for yield on those. Now, this year, 2020, we had a lot of issues besides COVID. The issues in soybeans, we've seen a lot of drift issues off from the prevented plant acres this year. Had drift issues from corn. There was some areas that got corn in early, and then got some significant rains, and so the soybeans got in late, and the post-emergence corn products drifted a lot to corn. We had some areas with application issues as far as clean out in sprayers, where they basically contaminated themselves because they didn't do a good enough clean out, or in cases where the booms especially weren't cleaned out, you could see strips down through the field as they went to that next application. Additives that heated up chemical activity. We've seen that in the past. But this year we had such ideal spraying conditions. And when you put heavy doses of additives in ideal spraying conditions where it isn't under stress, those beans, we get added activity with those chemicals, and sometimes it does show up on the soybeans. And so need to be aware of that. In good conditions, you don't need those real heavy additive packages to get you the control you need. Uh, we've seen also nozzle issues. You know, with dicamba, we want to use coarse nozzles to avoid possible drift movement. If we want to use the Liberty or glufosinate, we need the drips, droplets as fine as we can get them to get good coverage, because it really is a coverage. It doesn't translocate a lot. And so consequently, we need those fine droplets. So left coarse nozzles in, didn't work. Left fine nozzles in, had problems. And so nozzle issues were there. We even seen some plant stands. Boy, there was just a ton of people this year that, and I don't know where it totally came from, but there was a lot of people out there promoting planting your beans before your corn, get them in early, and you're going to have better beans. Well, on some of those early plantings, it was a month or more before those beans came up, and we had some spotty stands on account of that. And also spraying pre's after crop is emerged. Most of our pre's say up to crop emergence, and there is a reason. And if they are cracking or coming through and you haven't got the pre on, you got to make sure you're reading if your pre will allow you to do that. There's several of them that can and can be post-emergence, but we need to be aware of that. Couple pictures to finish up and we'll be done here. What does this look like? At first glance, you see this bubbling, you see kind of it's puckered a little bit, and automatically it goes to dicamba. This had no dicamba on it, no dicamba within 5 miles. If you look right up here, there's a divot in that leaf, and that is common with this blistering with a post-emergence acid aniline. We used to see this when we were using acid anilids at higher rates, and by acid anilines, I'm talking about the duals, the warrants, the outlooks, that chemistry. And they will get this little notch divot in them, and can confusing. Don't know. It normally doesn't affect yield. I wasn't able to follow up on these to see if any were affected, but it was across the board showing that type of damage. Here's where we'll normally see about that dicamba over the top. We've got the puckering and kind of cupping, and then the growing point might be slowed up and not doing as good as what we normally see. And so just want to point out, don't want to have to make sure what we're saying is the problem is what it really is. One last comment here is if you want to see this summer, we did virtual tours at the Northeast Farm. Each one of the different types of beans are looked at in a separate program. They're about 5 to 7 minute long YouTube videos. Here's the link to go to the Northeast site for all those videos. It also has some areas on diseases and planting and a whole bunch of different tours. And this particular link will get you to that site, and where I believe there's like 9 different videos you can look at. So with that, Matt, or Adam, I think I'll turn it back to questions. I'll copy that off and put it in the chat at the end here. Here's my contact information. Do we have any questions out there to answer?
We don't have any in the chat right now. If you do have questions for Paul, please feel free to click the Q&A portion and type in your question, or you can type it into the chat if you don't see the Q&A, but click the Q&A and you should be able to type your question out to us. If you don't have any questions, that also works too.
Okay, I stopped share. I'm going to copy that off for you and get it into the chat.
And then also a reminder, we do have the poll open right now, so please feel free to go ahead and answer that. Paul, we do have a couple questions coming in. First one is, what about using yellows?
Okay, yes, we still do some treatments with using yellows, and it all depends on your weed spectrum. They're very reasonable, very good control of a lot of our common weeds. Large seeded broadleaves, they're a little bit weaker on, so we need to come over the top with something on them. But boy, I sure like using yellows. The thing about using yellows in South Dakota, they need to be incorporated. So as long as you're still doing tillage, and to me, if you're using a good field finisher, you can even use those yellows with one pass and have fairly good control.
All right, Paul. The next question is, how did you select the rates on the dicamba drift study?
Well, we did a preliminary study last year where we did look at more rates, and we kind of picked out rates where we thought we would see the breaks at. I wanted to have a rate low enough that we were hoping we wouldn't see any injury, but then try and get a couple in where we would see some of that. And then we had that one final in where we knew we would have a lot of injury. And so there's nothing real magical about that. If you figure them out, our original study started at looking at 1/20,000th of a rate all the way up to a 1/10 of a rate last year. And people were confused by that. They wanted the actual amounts. So they're all based on that, but we just put the actual amounts in this year of the ones we selected.
All right, the next question. On the slide titled Grass Control and Dicamba Soybeans, the program average was 98 or better. What was this program?
Basically, that was all the other treatments in that study. And we will be getting those books out to people. And so that was just the average across, I believe, about 8 treatments given there.
Okay, thanks, Paul. The next question, any alternative pre-product other than metribuzin to pair with Sonic to improve grass control? Some soybean varieties are sensitive to metribuzin.
Yeah, you can use some acid anilids in there, whether it be a warrant or a dual. And you also have, you can start out if you're not into the Sonic or the Authority, you can look at the Valor product. Again, it's selecting products that fit your weed situation the best.
All right, thank you. And then the last question that I see right now is, are the 2021 weed trial data available online or only paper copies?
We haven't got it up online yet. We're working on that right now. They're only available paper copy. You can either get those from if you're re-registering on your commercial applicators and get the other books. They will be mailed out to you that way, or you can contact my office and we can mail you a copy. We're hoping to get them up online in the next couple weeks.
All right. And as Sarah typed in the chat, please feel free to stay on if you'd like to have any additional questions answered or you'd like to visit with Paul about weed management. We'll be having the session continue, and we'll just stay in this room. If you're on the last 2 weeks, we went into different rooms. However, this week we'll be staying in the same one. And so there's also a link in the chat to presentation recordings. Those are going to be from the previous weeks. And then on Friday of this week, please look for an email from SDSU Extension that's going to be having a survey link for feedback. Help us make this better. And then the last thing is, if you have any additional questions, please feel free to email me, and I'll make sure I get those to Paul. Or if you had any issues with today's presentation, I can go ahead and get that to the people that need it. Paul, we just had another question come in. There was a published glyphosate soybean trial table that shows the minimum yield was about 60.7 bushels. That just seems way too high compared to fields around here with the drought. And Paul, you're currently muted.
Okay, I'm not sure which slide. You know, we were seeing at Volga this year good between 60 to 70 bushel soybeans, and that's where a lot of them were done. Also at Northeast, we were probably in the 50 some bushel yield range. Southeast, very few that made over 40. And again, all of our trials, we have fertility levels high enough that fertility isn't going to be a concern for us. And we use as good a genetics as we can get. And so usually our yields are running pretty high. We do 4-row plots, and so we don't have any variability from the 4 rows right next. We harvest the center 2 rows out of the plots. Each plot has a minimum of 3 replications, and 90% of them will have 4 replications. In fact, I think all of our soybean ones did have 4 reps this year.
Okay.
And so
Scott was saying this was for the Northeast farm, Paul.
Okay, yeah, we did have a few of them up around 60 bushels. You know, we had good moisture levels there to start with in the spring, and I'm surprised that our yields, that they came out as good as they did, because I just been working on the overall for Northeast Farm, and we were down about 6 inches below normal for moisture this year. But with that reserve in the soil and very good soil at the Northeast Research Farm, those were the yields we got.
Okay. And I see that there's one in the chat. Did you see many variety differences between the acid annelid injury?
Yes, the acid annelid injury, on the observations I seen, there appeared to be quite a bit of visual injury. Again, like I said, I wasn't able to follow any of those through, but we did see it, and I have no science behind this, but we've seen it on more of the E3 varieties. than we did on some of the other varieties. And I have no explanation for why that may be.
All right. I'm just double checking. I don't see any other questions listed. And for those of you who are still on here, I believe now we'll transition over to the Q&A session. And Paul, thank you for your presentation today.